and device to learn about my existence. Let's see, click ahead. Yeah. As a highly intuitive artist, I'm interested in using that philosophy. As I said, I want my life to inform and bleed into my work and reveal itself kind of as freely as possible. I want my sculpture to be as close and true to an idea as possible, like not literally out of my sketchbook or something, but as true to what it maybe looks like as energy within my brain in a more abstract sense. So this is a piece from 2016 that I think speaks directly to that idea. Phosphine is a word that talks about the light you see when you close your eyes shut really tightly, which isn't actually light, but just like a stimulation of your retina cells. And I liked the abstraction of that and thinking about how an idea kind of comes from this electricity and comes out into the world. So that became kind of a metaphor for me, thinking about like that threshold, or thinking about how things translate from that into the physical space, making something unseen a tangible thing in front of you. I don't know why my arrows aren't working, but I guess I'll have to click by hand. It's all right. So I think about this process in some ways like a birth. I'm not sure if you all will be able to hear the sound on this, but I'm going to talk over it either way. There's a labor that leads to the creation of something amazing that didn't really exist before. And this is a video piece that I made last year. It was like the first time I'd ever done anything like this, a video piece like this. But I wanted to talk about it as that idea of birth of an idea, but also in the sense of how risk works for me in the studio. And it's an super important part of my process. I think that space of risk is a little more unfiltered. It allows things to emerge that I didn't plan. So I had made this womb form, coil built it, and I was thinking about returning home. I'm from Colorado, and I was thinking about how to talk about that experience and that beginning. And I just had this thought to like fill this thing with water and see what happened. And I had no idea kind of how this would go down, but I was pretty excited about what happened and kind of thinking about learning from what happened in some way. So I thought about this as like, almost being born or being present for my birth in a way. Next piece. So I was super privileged in growing up, being exposed to art and this type of like thinking and ideas. And my dad's an artist and runs a bronze foundry, and my grandpa was an artist as well, as seen on the right side there. And being an artist was like a really realistic career for me. It was really like shown to me as something that I could do. And I'll always be grateful for that background. I think it taught me so much about discipline and about craftsmanship. And, I think is why I fell in love with such a process heavy medium like ceramics, but I'm thinking a lot, especially more lately, just thinking about that early education and most of my schooling really being pretty neglectful of anything that fell outside of like classical, patriarchal, and frankly, like white formulas of thinking and making. And it's clicking, sorry. So I think in my pursuit of making like better art is where I've started to disrupt and disrupt some of the perpetuation of those things that were taught to me. And for me, that better art came in the form of more honest art, which meant really kind of diving in and thinking about who I was outside of that education. And it may have taken me longer than it did to change that trajectory, but I think, about 10 years ago, I just like lost all the hair on my body from an autoimmune disease. And it really kind of just like changed the way that I moved through the world, and really kind of started to disrupt that, you know, these masculine ideals that I had been raised in, and perpetuating myself, were all of a sudden kind of making me feel like crap, you know, as I was sort of losing clear examples of my masculinity and identity, when in losing all of my hair. So I started making sculptures that for me seemed to be dealing with this idea of toxic masculinity and pushing against feelings that I was having. I, you know, my work, I think, got softer and more sensitive as I was doing the same as a person. It involved more materials, and materials that I was taught, you know, were maybe not acceptable as art materials. Started on a path of more directly talking about my feelings surrounding vanity, like this piece, Spineless here. You know, and I think that can seem like a pretty small act, but I think as a man in our culture, to show any kind of sensitivity or weakness can really be like a breaking of the male code. And once I started pushing against that, it was clear to me, like, really how much power that was holding over me. So you know, I want my work to ask the viewer to bring something to the table, you know, join me in questioning the world and the way that we see the world. Oops, sorry, Al. And I think as an artist, it's my job to interrupt that structure, and I want to make things that feel strangely familiar, like that feeling of having something on the tip of your tongue, but you can't quite find the words. So context is also something that's important to me and a big question for me. You know, thinking about, you know, I always feel like there's a really big disconnect between making something in the studio and then displaying it in some sort of formal way. And so I try to play with those ideas in my work and how they're displayed. And I think, you know, site specificity has been an interesting way for me to dive into that, like making something specifically for the space that it's going to be in. This was an installation that I did in Omaha, Nebraska, that was in what used to be this old Italian market, which was, you know, for over 100 years, it was this like this institution in the neighborhood. And, you know, due to gentrification and all sorts of different factors, it was eventually shut down and had been flipped into this really kind of awful modern apartment. And, you know, I was just so struck by the dissonance between like its existence and having like a really clear identity, and then all of a sudden like having kind of no identity and being kind of whitewashed. So, you know, some of the work talked about that history, and other work sort of interacted with the architecture, trying to acknowledge the space. There are a couple pieces that were in what is now a bedroom. Dowsing for Before was a show that I did that was a little bit more of a deep dive into site specificity, and all the work was made in my studio that was kind of right near this pool on this property where we were living. And it was all really, really specific to this space and the feeling. You know, the feeling that I was really intrigued by was, you know, this property, it's this kind of strange big 10-acre like orange orchard that at one point was this kind of epic, glorious estate. And, you know, it has this big kind of mansion on it and a carriage house and, you know, all of this sort of fancy stuff. But it had been, you know, neglected over the years, and it had this really strange, almost like secret garden kind of feel. You know, and I would walk around it and just, you know, kind of dream about what it used to be, you know, and it always kind of left me feeling a little bit sad. So, you know, I was interested in that feeling of nostalgia and yearning for a time. You know, this place was built in the early 1900s, and, you know, yearning for a time that I had like absolutely no access to. So I wanted to just dive into that, right? No pun intended, I guess. We yeah, so you could come and view this show, like you could walk around and look at it from above, which was kind of a strange experience. You could wade down into it, right? Step down in and kind of immerse yourself in it. So, you know, some of it talked about like things also that I yearned for in my own life, like the loss of my hair that came in the form of this big, thick, heavy wig. You know, and something that I'm always battling with clay, and I'll be curious if anybody else has this experience, but I always feel like when I make something and it has this energy and this softness, malleability, and then when I fire it, it kind of like becomes dead or loses some of that. So I've been experimenting with ways to, you know, kind of reinsert some of that energy or life in it. This was a way of posting it up on these metal rods, you know, hoping to kind of give it a reinforce that feeling of movement that I was trying to put in it. You know, and this piece was made by pressing clay on my head. It was important to me that it like had an impression of my actual head. You know, thinking about it once being part of me. And I think I'd also got some clay in my eye. That's why my eye looks really red. But I'm always trying to disrupt and think about different ways that I can handle the material, you know, past just sort of traditional means. So that was pressed on my head, then sort of stiffened up, cradled in a piece of cloth, and then coil built off of and sculpted as I went. You know, so other pieces in the show, you know, some talked to the history of the space itself, and some talked about, you know, different kind of sad things that had happened in my life and my wife's life. Thinking about, you know, maybe the possibility of life being circular, or, you know, maybe life on Earth not being the end of things. Thinking of memory and the distortions and limits of it, you know. I think, you know, so much of nostalgia is based on like memories that, you know, maybe aren't even accurate, right? And so I was interested in that idea. Maybe this abstract form losing some of its truth. There's a little detail of it there. It's a little molded eraser that was cast in bronze. So, you know, sometimes I'll play with like, you know, trompe l'oeil, or making something that kind of feels like something that's real. You know, again, kind of playing with that idea of truth. You know, is this more real than an eraser, or is the eraser the real thing? Narcissus, again, kind of thinking about my own experiences with vanity. This piece, you know, is most meant to reflect a diver, like literally thinking about it being like the reflection of the diver if there were water. So yeah, Narcissus is like a character from Greek mythology who, you know, was kind of like stared at himself in the pond, kind of obsessed with his vanity. And these tiles were at the deep end of the pool, which were, you know, speaking about that void, that space, that loss of memory, or loss of water, or loss of what once was. And these were, you know, like drawings of the pool from different perspectives. They were supposed to be sort of reflections of those arches. So there you can see the big house that overlooked the pool. This is like this massive, like 4,000 square foot house. So the arches, I like drew the pool from each arch, like looking at different vantage points of that space. So moving forward, yeah, Peter had mentioned the Roswell Artist in Residence program, so I'll talk a little bit about my experience there. And this is the kind of the culminating thesis show from my time there in the Roswell Artists and Residence program, which you should all look into applying. Applications are open now. And it's a year-long grant where you get a house and a studio to live and work, and a stipend and support. And it's pretty like unbelievable, unique residency in terms of the time and the, you know, the fact that you kind of don't, I mean, you don't need a job because you get paid basically to make your work. So, you know, I really, this was a unique time for me. My wife and I had decided we were going to get married. We had been together for a really long time. And, you know, I could have maybe expected the quietness of the desert might start to reveal, you know, things. And, you know, it did. I slowly started kind of unpacking and thinking about dealing with old things from my past, confronting, you know, certain things that I had kept from myself or from my wife or from my family. Really trying to think about, you know, getting married as like entering and owning up to, you know, this sort of manhood that I was entering. So yeah, with my history in terms of my dad's foundry and growing up around that, you know, I'm always really inspired by ancient bronze work, and particularly I'm really intrigued by Hellenistic bronzes, which you know, being like a really long time ago, thousands of years ago, was this shift within the art canon where we started seeing in some ways like more contemporary conceptual thinking. This piece like reflecting much more mundane activity. We become voyeurs looking upon this boy who's pulling a thorn from his foot. And you know, it's also interesting in that it brings attention to the skin, brings attention also in that sense to how the piece is made and the fact that it's hollow, which is something that is not really seen before this time. You know, there's kind of like this implied thorn that's maybe piercing through, right, both the skin of the boy, but like the materiality of the bronze there. So yeah, in doing this kind of work, looking into myself, you know, this boy became a symbol for my inner child. He was thought to be like a faithful boy who was delivering a message, and he had picked up a thorn along the way, but didn't wait till after that message was passed on till he pulled the thorn from his foot. And I really related to that idea of like people pleasing or putting other people before yourself. And so this was a piece that I'd made, you know, kind of in homage to that bronze, to that boy. You know, this was this really big carved splinter that I laid upon this sort of membrane of skin, this rubber membrane that I had made. You know, and I think we can all relate to that idea of carrying splinters in some form or another, like burdens that weigh us down. And this time really became about trying to like dislodge or change some of that, try to pull that thorn. So the exhibition was bookended by these two triptych photograph pieces, again, which was something that I had never really done before, but I was interested in, like, you know, trying to think about different ways to display clay, or, you know, again, like reinsert some sort of energy of its making. You know, and so it came in the form of these two triptychs that it talked about like opposite ideas. One was about kind of urgency, thinking about great lengths that I had gone in my life to uphold certain lies or facades. And then on the other end of the show was, you know, sort of the antithesis to that idea, literally, you know, slaking down a piece that I had blown up in the kiln, which was actually the first splinter piece that I had carved. You know, and I had, you know, spent, I don't know, probably a month like carving this thing, and you know, like we underestimate or whatever, and I just blew it up, and you know, I shut the kiln off, I pulled the shards out, and it was like, oh my god. And I just lived with it in my studio for a while. And, you know, this idea came out of it, which like reinforced the whole show. It reinforced that idea. It made it so much better. And so, you know, I think that, I mean, there's so much to learn from our mistakes, which is, you know, what I think we're all interested in clay for that reason, is that it's full of that. Oh my gosh. I just answered a phone call. Sorry, my phone's going off over here. Yeah, so, you know, in ancient Greek, in studying some of these bronzes, I was drawn to this concept that they called ascesis, which meant the act of forming or modeling done by the craftsman. And an ascetic was like an artist type who went to work on themselves. And I was interested in that in my own process that I was going through while in Roswell. And I think what I continue to do with my work, which is like, you know, mining myself, my interior for, you know, for content or for ideas. You know, I want to reveal and unpack, you know, parts of myself in hopes of becoming a better person. Here, thinking about putting something to rest in this piece, Ashes, or maybe new beginnings coming from that destruction. And I included in this piece, this was the first sculpture I'd ever made. And lucky me, growing up in a foundry, that sculpture got to become a bronze, which is like pretty cool. And yeah, and so I was interested in this piece, like containing both maybe like my first idea and then my current idea. And I was thinking about, you know, how ideas evolve, and, you know, if somehow they're all linked, and that's like a continuous stream of consciousness or something. So as you went through the show, you know, like the tension kind of released both in like color and form. These are these two nesting forms that were kind of opposites of each other, a positive and a negative. Most of these like spooning figurative pieces. And this is an image of a red figureware pot, which I'm sure we're all familiar, Greek piece. And you know, it shows this idea of ascesis in a little more of a literal sense. Athletes would, you know, rub oil on themselves, and after a match would like scrape themselves with this tool called a strigil. And I became interested in that tool and thinking about, you know, a scraping back or revealing. And I had just in like studio observations, I was watching like this drain trap I had accumulate layers and layers of material as I was making this show. And I just had this thought to pair a strigil that I made with that drain trap, and thinking about that, you know, and my participation in that idea of ascesis. You know, because there was also this detail of like athletes would scrape themselves into these oil canisters, scrape that grime off, and that was sold as this like ointment or something. And I just thought that was like so disgusting. And, you know, this drain trap thing was like really beautiful, but also really disgusting. If you opened it up, it just like smelled really bad, you know. But yeah, I thought, you know, I have dreams of like someday making a whole show and then like only showing the drain trap. I felt like there's something kind of revealing and beautiful about that idea of having residue from everything in the show. So this is another one of those Hellenistic bronzes. This is the Croatian apoxamenos. And apoxamenos means oil scraper. So this is like a bronze of a man scraping himself with a strigil. And it was, you know, lost like a lot of bronzes from that time. And it was discovered in the 90s by a scuba diver. And yeah, I love this image. You know, I love the fact that this was found. There's the unlikeliness that even exists. And it, you know, it sparked a lot of work to come from that, some of which I'm still working on now. This is a show, Angle of Repose, that I was invited to do in Fort Collins at CSU, where I went to undergrad. And it kind of was sort of like based all off of that piece. An Angle of Repose references like it's a geological term referencing the way, like the angle at which a certain material settles in a pile. And it, it can also just be used to talk about, a reclining figure, or, a metaphor to speak to a lot of different things. And, I was thinking about it in terms of like, like the building of a life or the building of a career. And, I chose certain kind of moments in my life as, thinking about them as maybe anchor points or things to kind of build off of. This was another kind of another iteration of that wig piece, a little more directly inspired by the Apoxymenos found in the ocean, with all of that kind of thousands of years of like sea life encrusted on it. So this wig is sort of thick and built up. Alma mater, which translates to nourishing mother, referencing two firsts in my artistic career. One, that donkey coming back, that little bronze donkey here, I like enlarged it and painted it, which was also like my first painting. So it was all about playing off that first idea. And then there's this beaked jug, which was the first clay assignment that I had ever had in college, was to replicate that, which I think is a pretty common first assignment. So here's the Apoxymenos restored in all of its glory. You can see the strigil there on the right that might have been in its hand. We don't really know exactly what form that strigil was, but yeah, again, like thinking about them kind of resurrecting this piece, scraping it back, revealing its vulnerable naked body underneath. I really love that idea. The ancient Greeks didn't have a different word for mask than what they had for face. So there was this, strange, like not understanding how to experience like the difference between like inner life or outer appearance. And so, yeah, I think, a big part of the work I do is like searching for, a clear distinction in my own life about, what's a mask and what's a face. So this is me making a mold of my body to replicate, to make my own version of the Apoxymenos that you saw up on that scaffolding in the last piece. And then I'll recycle works sometimes, like, like keeping things around and seeing, maybe how they could be reimagined. So I reused that same figure and, slowly thought about like re-encrusting it with, texture, like I had seen it in that first image when I discovered that piece. So I wanted to, speak to maybe that full history of it, both like laying on the surface of the bottom of the sea, and then, being resurrected, stood back up. So I liked that idea of standing it up when it was like still encrusted. So this was done by just like slowly stippling on layers and layers of mortar. And this will get into kind of the last bit of work that I'll talk about, which is part of a show that I did in Denver as part of a residency and teaching experience. And that was a show called Filling Station, and the gallery was these had these three distinct spaces. And I decided, I was returning home. I hadn't lived near home for a long time, and I was thinking about like my absence, and thinking about how I could deal with these three different spaces. And I thought about kind of breaking them down just into like birth, life, and death, thinking about a basic narrative structure, narrative arc. So here, this was like the birth room as I was thinking of it. And so I was trying to really like dive into my domestic history and, think about, just like what even had to happen for me to come into existence, thinking about some like serious heavy stuff. Like my mom was, married to someone else before my dad, and where she had my older brother and sister with this man, and it was like this awful abusive relationship. And I was just thinking about, how that sort of like almost had to happen for her to leave him and get with my dad, so that I could be born, right? And so I was thinking about the weight of that, and thinking about my birth story and the way, that construct of masculinity was like put on me the moment my sex was discovered. So this is a piece kind of playing with, hoping to live in, in a space where I don't have to feel so tied to a binary of gender. So one side was, you entered and saw it as sort of a butterfly, a monarch butterfly, and then it revealed on the back side was that it was a baseball glove, which was just just came out of thinking and looking. I was going to make that baseball glove, but I hadn't thought about the butterfly part until I just saw, just was observing those in different places, sitting in different ways in my studio. So here's a look at the whole gallery. You can see those 3 different spaces. This was like the middle space, which, came to be like representing of a sexual awakening, or, thinking about, the way that I kind of became aware of life, and the complications that came with that experience. I think for a lot of boys, and, I might have been, one of the first generations that was like, and in some ways learned about sex through like online pornography. And, I think a lot about how much that shaped the way that I think, and how much that reinforced like an exaggerated toxic masculinity in a big portion of my life. So that this work was meant to kind of push against that, think about how I could, maybe take that mask off, take that part of my learning away, and move through the world in a space that felt more true to me. So this hose piece, which was the hose from that video that I showed at the beginning, which, kind of like became almost, like a penis in a way or something. And here, like very literally became, like a graphic line drawing. And to the death room. And I think, death was like, and has been like a really in the forefront of all of our lives right now during the pandemic. And this work was all made during like the early lockdown times. And, I just found myself, like so many, just really faced with my own mortality, this kind of wonder. It was like, am I going to get this? Could I die from this? Who in my family might. And I was thinking about things that I might like regret, or, things that I'd taken for granted in my life, and what, might, if I all of a sudden was met with my deathbed, like what would I be thinking about? What would I be wishing I had done, right? What did I regret about certain relationships, or, a lack of effort in reaching out to someone? This is a piece I'm thinking about the relationship with my older brother, my half brother. And, speaking about the smothering feeling of carrying pain. This piece was made, I pressed clay directly off of that other figure, which was important to me, both in like trying to make something in a way I hadn't, using it almost as a reverse mold. And like connecting it to, literally being half of me. I liked thinking about that idea of, my brother and I never really realized until we were older that we were like half siblings. I mean, it wasn't being kept from us, but just thinking about that, you know, realization, what it means to be, you know, emotionally brothers, but literally half of each other genetically. Oops. Get to the last slide here. So yeah, I mean, a lot of this work is still pretty new to me. Due to the pandemic, like nobody got to see this show. I like two people, the gallery director and assistant, and I think maybe one other person. So I, you know, I think there's a certain release that happens in the process when you like show the work, you have an opening, you talk to people about it. I felt like a lot of that still hasn't happened. And, you know, I think about time as being really important in understanding my work. And, you know, so much discovery of meaning for me comes from sitting with it, thinking about it, you know, moving past that point into a new stage of my life and being able to kind of reference back to that time. So, you know, I think I'm still in this kind of this waiting period. You know, we're all getting pretty used to waiting at this point. So I'm waiting to learn more from this work, and excited to see, you know, what more it might teach me. So yeah, thanks so much. That's the end of my slides, and I could stop sharing now, and we can open it up to questions if people have them.
Thanks so much. That was really great.
Thank you. Yeah.
Oh, good. Thanks.
If anybody would like to ask questions, I can read them back to Qwist so he can answer you.
Yeah, please. Anything, you know, anything at all. How I make something, whatever, clarify something that I said.
Mm-hmm. I was curious about the last piece where you were talking about the middle part, about, like, I guess, becoming aware of your sexuality in boyhood and having those female figures. And
Mm-hmm.
those figures are so beautiful. You know, like, I think when somebody entered that space, they wouldn't necessarily, they would find, I think they'd initially see the humor in the penis, but I think you framed them in a way that gave them a lot of like respect and integrity, whereas the actual context of how that came about isn't actually usually the case of looking at pornography online. So why did you, do you remember like why you made those choices to create the forms like that?
Yeah, I mean, well, yeah. So first I would just say, like, I was interested in them almost, you know, being referencing of the time in which, you know, I was becoming aware of this kind of thing, which was like a dial-up era. And I was thinking about them as almost like a blurred image coming into focus or something. If anybody who remembers dial-up remembers how that was. And yeah, and then, you know, it was funny, I had made those, and I don't know, I felt really, really strange about them. I think in a lot of ways, getting at what you're talking about, Michelle. And, you know, I'd like posted them on Instagram or whatever, and I was just like kind of amazed at how much attention they got compared to like a lot of things that I posted. And it just really started getting to me thinking about just about that, you know, about that, you know, about the power of like sex or sexual imagery or sensuality as a visual form. And yeah, you know, in terms of displaying them, you know, in some sort of like honored or an honored way, or that, you know, I don't know if I thought about that super consciously. You know, I mean, I definitely wanted to put them like on a pedestal, to heighten them. It was important to me that they were on taller pedestals than the other pieces. So I guess I was maybe thinking about that in a roundabout way, but I don't know if I thought exactly, if I thought about that totally deliberately. I don't know.
Oh, that's all right. I just think
Yeah.
it's like, a conversation can be given in so many different ways.
Right.
And so I thought that was, I think about those things in my work, like how you can create something that can lead someone in on a different consciousness or a way of allowing that information to be seen and questioned. So
Yeah.
I'll get to a few other people's questions.
Cool.
You talked about, this is from Harris, our graduate student, Rosenblum. He asked, you talked a bit about the life that leaves the clay. Can you talk a bit about the ways you've approached preserving it?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's what I'm always fighting. And I think, getting into some more like ephemeral works has been an exciting thing, and thinking of that, like just kind of bypassing the firing altogether. I think that that birth video piece in some ways was so much more exciting to me than I sat on that piece for a long time, and I was going to fire it, and then like I had that thought, and I think so much about that preserving like the fragility of that wet clay, made that piece kind of what it was. So I'm playing with that more and more as a way to deal with that. So ephemerality, I guess. Again, thinking about patterns of, how we make things, how we're taught to make things. I think we all initially learn about clay from pottery, or, thinking about something having a distinct bottom that's built up off of. So I've played with, displaying something maybe not in the way that it was built, maybe like something was built from its bottom up, like maybe it lays on its side, which kind of gives it a new energy, kind of unsettles that stability. I guess those are some ways. And then putting things up on these posts, I've been doing that a little bit. That's been kind of, I think, also in the same kind of effort, Yeah, I'm interested in like trying to erase the way, like the way it was built or something. Some of those wig pieces, it was like, building them so that they didn't have a bottom or a top or something, Yeah, thanks.
I'm just reading down the list here. Our next question, a student wants to know more about your repeated egg imagery.
Yeah. I'm glad you noticed. Yeah. Yeah, I have made that form quite a few times. I initially was thinking about that as being kind of like a sort of a abstracted self-portrait of like my bald head, and just like trying to start kind of accepting my new bald identity, and like seeing it as something like smooth and beautiful. So I really thought about that egg as being this kind of flawless, beautiful form. And so I've just kind of played with that form a lot, and it just, I don't know where it came, just out of probably just looking at my head in the mirror. So it's kind of egg shaped.
Okay. How do you decide what to keep or remove? This is from David Crunk, another grad student. How do you decide what to keep and remove from your studio, especially if you think about reusing an object from another project?
That's a really good question. God, I mean, it's strange because I think, there's a lot of comfort in having things in your studio. I think, like, you can kind of walk in there and it's like, okay, I've accomplished these things, and it, in some ways, I think it's kind of a comfort blanket. I remember getting encouraged in grad school a lot to get everything out of my studio because it was like I was relying on that comfort too much or something. Maybe it was holding me back. But yeah, I don't know if it's like super conscious, other than if I still feel kind of unresolved or excited by something, I think it's important for me to have it in the space. At a certain point, you know, that clutter gets a little distracting, you know, but like that, I don't know, that blown up splinter piece, like I really enjoyed having that in my space. Well, actually, I really didn't enjoy having it because it really made me uncomfortable and constantly reminded me of like this stupid thing I had done. So that having that energy was kind of exciting because it, you know, it sort of pushed me to figure out something that I could do with it. If that makes sense. I hope that answered your question, David.
Thank you. I think it did. Brittany, I'm sorry, Brittany, if I pronounced Rainwright from OSU. She says, you mentioned your exposure to being an artist at a young age. I wonder how your father and grandfather's work influenced your use of scale in your work and perhaps material choices.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a huge influence. You know, I think about scale a lot because I think that I've relied on it as a way to like perform my masculinity in some senses, you know, like I can make big things, you know. But I mean, growing up around them and helping my dad build big things, like there was also something, or there is something to making something bigger than yourself. And for me, like, you know, almost something that could like threaten my, you know, threaten me physically with its scale and its weight as a way to almost, you know, push against my like masculinity or my strength. So I, you know, I try to play with that idea. I think, you know, scale is a hard thing. I mean, scale is so, I mean, scale in ceramics is so different than scale in other materials, you know. Scale in bronze is a totally different thing. I think we're used to seeing larger bronzes, but, you know, scale in ceramics, you know, it comes, I don't know, Pete Pinnell, my one of my teachers in grad school, always talked about things either being kind of like, oh, my friend Patrick's here, he might be able to speak to this better, but it was like, you know, we either make things that are like, that can like sit in your lap, or they're like bunny size, or like, you know, there's like these three different scales we make, you know. And I mean, I don't make things large at all compared to like artists like Viola Frey or, you know, Matt Waddell, or these people who are like making massive, you know, monumental works. I think I got a little lost as to what my point was there, but
I also think it's also what you're familiar with, like you're kind of getting that, and that scale, what your grandparent, your grandfather and father were working on, it seems about the same scale. So I mean, that may be part of it.
Yeah, I think you're totally right, Michelle. Yeah.
Our other grad student, Jennifer, has asked, can you talk about your broad use of visual language, representation, and abstract forms, and how that functions in the way you guide your content?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I like the way that, you know, one can really highlight the other, like putting those things in conversation, something that's like maybe, you know, hyper real or super realistic, molded from a real thing, in conversation with something totally constructed and abstract. You know, I think about that as being in some ways like what a headspace is like, or my headspace. It's both like, you know, really realistic, but also super fantasy. And I just, you know, I think, you know, I like how when they're in conversation, they both make the other one look more intense. You know, this looks more abstract because it's next to something more real. You know, and I think, I mean, art space is, I think, all about kind of playing with reality and playing with people's expectations of things, making people try to see something in a new way. I think it's all kind of about that, you know. I like that there's like a dissonance that happens when those, you know, those real things get with those abstracted things, or sometimes it's a molded thing, sometimes it's the actual thing. I like those, you know, little material discoveries. I think they can be kind of exciting. Maybe a little gimmicky, I don't know, but that's okay.
One of our Kent State students has asked, has your art helped you deal and resolve some of your things that you discussed?
Oh yeah, I think it is like therapeutic in that sense, I guess. Yeah, like you know, I really wanted my work to like teach me something about myself, about my existence, about my, you know, things that I crutch against, or, you know, so I look to it as being a little bit therapeutic. I think it does help me, gives me like courage to deal with things or confront things. You know, and I don't always like intentionally go into it like, okay, I've got this like really weighing thing in my life and I need to fix it. Like I don't mean to say that I do it like that. I think it's just about sort of, I think in working intuitively, a lot of it kind of reveals, and then it's just about observing it and seeing what there is to learn from it.
I don't want to keep us going too long, so I guess we'll take just maybe Peter can let me know. Do you mind taking 3 more questions?
Oh, sure. Yeah, whatever. Yeah, we can.
All
Yeah.
right. Patrick would like to know, is your work about expressing outward to your audience, or is it mostly about self-reflection?
I guess probably both. You know, I think like in expressing outwardly and putting it on a stage in a way to be consumed, it like really makes me confront those internal things. So I think those things are always kind of at play with each other. Patrick, thank you.
We have a question from Chloe from the UK. I hope you don't mind me asking, and if we take a detour, but she wants to know if you could talk briefly about the commercial aspect of your practice. Do you make sales from these exhibitions or work to commission?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think that's what we're all in some ways trying to do, is like, I don't know, hopefully like make a job out of making our art, right? I think it's a huge challenge. I think when you make things that maybe don't conform to certain consumability factors, right? I mean, scale is one thing. Like, it's really hard to sell something that someone can't like put on their shelf in their house. So, you know, I've done some like commission things, and those have been like ways to make money. And I mean, I've been pretty lucky to even come upon those things. But, you know, in terms of a lot of that work that I've shown, like, I mean, I've sold a few things here and there, but it's like, yeah, not so much, I think. You know, but it's also been a way, you know, I think being tied with academia, like, that's part of the job, that's part of the way to make money from it. You know, and that work, if it's not sold, it's kind of sold in a way in terms of like getting me jobs or something, as a way to support the work itself. But it's something I've really been questioning a lot lately, you know, like if, you know, if I don't make more consumable things, because I think it's really hard to make consumable things too. I mean, it's like, that's a real skill to be able to like make a marketable object. So maybe I just don't have the skill to do that.
I don't know, the way I look at your work is it's similar to like performance art or dance. but I think because the objecthood of it, we know that we can put it somewhere and it's not like a moment that's fleeting. So then we start to wonder how we can get it somewhere else,
Yeah.
or return on it.
Right.
I don't know. David would like to know if you have any artists, books, or films you've been inspired by.
Yeah. Gosh, I know. I mean, my talk only looks at like ancient Greek bronzes, and I think I need to start inserting a little more like ceramic-y stuff, because there's a lot of artists I look at. I've really been trying to broaden my influences lately. I think a lot of us are really kind of trying to look into artists who have been overlooked in our culture, and I'm super interested in some like really big artists like that I think are doing really big inspiring things. Like Theaster Gates is someone who I really look to in terms of expanding just even the way that I think about art. I think he just has such huge ideas about what art can be, and he's been like really inspiring for me. Who else? In terms of like maybe he's works somewhat in ceramics, and smaller scale artists. I like Liz McGore. She makes kind of found object sculptures, molded sculptures, plays with materiality. She's someone pretty inspiring to me. Gosh, who else? It's one of those things I can never think of names, but I get called out. Yeah. I'll think about that, David. I could even email you or something.
Cool.
Well, that's the last question we have typed down there, and we have reached our allotted hour that I promised you. Qwist, thank you for being so generous with your time and for talking with us today. So the one sad thing about this is we can't hear the applause, but we really are grateful for you being here. So we wish you the best. We know we're going to see a ton from you in the future, and so thank you so much, and thanks everyone for coming.
Yes.
Thank you all. Thanks so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Qwist. It was awesome.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.